Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to look at three particular tools that are all related and kind of do the same thing. They are the clone tool, the perspective clone tool, and the healing tool. All three tools are extremely powerful for purpose of removing aspects of photos you don't like, cleaning up blemishes, cloning parts of an image you want to keep or duplicate. The perspective tool is sort of an add-on to the clone tool. It just allows you to clone and then paste your cloned piece within a different perspective. And you would change that as you go. So the clone tool, as you can see, selectively copies from an image or pattern using a brush. And to use the clone tool, we're going to use this image today to demonstrate. What we want to try to do, or the ultimate goal, would be to get rid of all of these road tracks in the field to make the field completely green instead. So in order to do that, we need to zoom in to get a better perspective on each track. So out here, I could do it, but I would do it probably not a very good job. And when I zoom in, I'd probably see my mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to take our time and do this right. Now, what we can do, I'm going to explain a couple things down here. As you know, the options for size, aspect ratio, angle, spacing, hardness, and force, we've talked about those a bit. Opacity would make my, whatever I paste into this image, either transparent or degrees of opaque, meaning I can't see through it. So depending what kind of job you're doing, if you're doing like an edit for a portrait or a face, you might use a lower opacity to give it a more realistic look so that you're not actually doing a hard kind of pasted circle over something to clean something up. I just say that the healing brush tool is the same idea. It uses the same sort of features to clean up faces and remove blemishes and things like that. So you would want to play with your opacity, see how that works out for you. Brush hardness, again, that's another point here. If I use a feathered, softer edge, I might have a little more realistic look. Hardness sometimes leaves an edge. What I'm trying to do in this exercise is remove edge. So I'm going to put my hardness down, give it a little bit of a feathered result. My brush size right now is pretty small, so I'll probably increase that. I don't want to go too big because I don't want to transplant a whole pile of stuff over it and make it look less realistic. So you want to just maybe think of the width of the tracks and try to stick with that. So down here, you have a few more aspects. What we have here at the moment is I'm going to go to source first. So for our source for cloning, we're going to say the source is the image. So when we clone, we actually hold control down and click, and then we hold control down, and left click. And that takes a sample from that circle. And I can move this around anywhere I want, and I can paste my sample by left clicking again. So you can see it's taking it out. Now you see the circle moving with me. So I would be taking wherever that circle is where I'd be taking from. So if I was to click here, it would pull out from wherever I'm moving it. And this is called alignment. But in terms of source, where I'm taking this from is the image. There are other ways to use a clone stamp tool. For example, my source could be a pattern. And under pattern, I can come in here and choose pretty much any pattern that the program has to offer by selecting it and then pasting that in. So if I was to do a rain pattern like I had on now, as you can see, my opacity is high. So we'll just increase my brush size for a second. And I can show you what rain pattern will do. Okay, so it just puts the pattern right into the image. If I select pattern, if I selected a different pattern, same idea, puts the pattern right into the image. It's almost like a brush when I'm just left clicking and pasting, almost like a brush tip. So keep that in mind. Patterns can be useful in other aspects, but we're going to use image for now because we're trying to correct this image. So there are some other areas here, such as dynamics. I should go back to pattern, for example, for one more item. Sample merged is down here under source. And just to give you guys an idea, the source is the choice you make, whether the data will be copied from the pattern shown above or from one of the images you have open, as I described. But sample merge says if this option is not checked, clone tool samples from the active layer. So if I say sample merged, then it will do it from the source layer. If I don't have it checked, it'll do it from the active layer. And right now we're working on the active layer, and we'll get into layers a little bit later. If this option is checked, Clone Stamp Tools samples from all layers. So this allows you to work in a non-destructive fashion without modifying any of the original pixels. You create a new layer, transparent, above the image layer. So that would be over here. This is the image layer. And I would create a new layer and make it transparent above the image layer. But we aren't going to do it right now, but we'll say fill with transparency. It's already there. And then this new layer being active, all clone pixels will appear in this layer. So if I add the new layer, I guess we'll do it just to be clear, and I had it selected, and I'm cloning from here, all clone pixels will appear in my new layer when I paste. I took a sample, but when I paste. We'll get back to that. We're not going to talk too much about the extra stuff with layers yet. We're going to wait and get you that information as we go. The other options down here, there's another one called dynamics. The dynamics are usually found in all brush options. As you can see too, it's also found on the healing brush tool. So that would apply to both. So is source, by the way, and alignment. So dynamic options, these options are basically used when using a brush, the kind of effect you want. So applying jitter right here means spacing in brush strokes. Strokes are made of successive brush marks. When they are very near, seem to draw a continuous line. Here, instead of being a line, brush marks are scattered over a distance you can set with the amount slider when you do jitter and you say the amount. So your brush will scatter over a line. Jitter is also available in the Paint Dynamic Editor. We'll get to that later, but where you can connect jitter to the behavior of the brush. That's jitter. Smooth stroke doesn't affect the rendering of the brush stroke, but its shape. It takes away the wobbles of the line you're drawing. And it makes drawing with a mouse easier. So that's what we're using. So this is going to be a kind of a useful option. When this option is checked, two setting areas appear, quality and weight. As you can see, you can change the default values to adapt them to your skill. A high weight value rigidifies the brush stroke, so it makes it kind of rigid. Just so you know, quality can increase as you go. Now, lock with brush view, or smooth stroke example, I should say. Sorry, I missed that. Trying to draw a straight line and a sine curve with the mouse. So a smooth stroke example would be, well, we'll get into that when we do the paintbrush, but let me just see if I can do it here for you. As you can see, it's depending on my weight, my quality, what it's doing. It's another option, just in terms of brush stroke. I'm just going to have to set my image. Purpose of this tutorial. Lock brush to view. When you're working on an image that is bigger in pixels than your screen, you have to zoom in and out a lot. This option allows a very natural iterative refinement process with no need to repeatedly ask the application to change brush size as you go the broad strokes of the detailing. Go between the broad strokes of the detailing. And hard edge is just what it is. It's a hard edge option for the brush. And, I prefer feather, but this is a hard edge option. And lastly, we have alignment. Three aspects of alignment here. When I click on it, you can see we have, four. So under none, each brush stroke is treated separately. For each stroke, the point where you first click is copied from the source. There's no relationship between the brush stroke and another. In non-aligned mode, different brush strokes will usually clash if they intersect each other. So if I have dynamics off and I choose none, registered, I'll do a line first. aligned. In this mode, the first click you make when painting sets off the offset. The offset is what the area you chose. So for example, control click, that's my offset, that circle. Okay? Between the source origin and the clone result, and all subsequent brush strokes are the same offset. You can use as many brush strokes as you like, and they will mesh smoothly with one another, where it's different from none. If you want to change the offset, select a new source origin by doing left click and control. So I can move the offset anywhere I want. Okay? But then when I move my thing around, my cursor around, the offset follows. Okay? That's alignment. So the offset is aligned with where I'm putting my brush. And make no mistake, where the crosshair is my brush under the clone stamp tool. So it follows. Registered, another option here, mode is a different mode from the alignment modes. When you copy from an image and control click, will register a source layer. So it'll assume that's the source layer. Then painting in a target layer will clone each corresponding pixel. Pixel with the same offset from the source layer. So from the layer you cloned from, it will take and copy the offset, the circle that you've selected. For example, the offset right there. This is the offset. Okay? This is useful when you want to clone parts of an image from one layer to another within the same image. That's if we had multiple layers. And again, we'll get into that when we get to layers. But remember, you can also clone from one image to another image. So I can clone from this and put it into another image too. And then fixed, our last mode. Using this mode, you'll paint the source origin, unlike the modes none or aligned. Even when drawing a line, the source will not be moved. So if I put fixed and I hit control and I move around, as you can see, my offset does not move. Just control Z to undo that. So those are some of the options under clone stamp. But for now, for the actual, we're going to choose aligned for the actual demonstration here of the clone stamp tool. And like I was saying, we're going to zoom in, get a little closer. Let's make sure that none of our dynamics are added. I'm going to lower this, keep up my opacity, and I'm going to make a selection, control left click. And I'm going to bring that selection below the space I clicked. And I'm going to kind of fill in what I'm doing. Now, the whole tedious part of this, and it's actually quite important that you do it, is to select close to your source. So, or put your offset close to where you're patching. So if I'm going to use clone stamp to kind of move across this, I'm not going to have my offset over here and my clone stamp way over here. What I would prefer you guys did, or what is best practice, I should say, is to keep moving your offset with you so that you get an accurate look of source material, as opposed to, if you were doing a face with skin, you have different shading in different parts of skin. And you would definitely not want to put your offset on a different shading of skin, only to clone stamp that shading to a lighter area of the face. So same goes with the field. But you get the general idea. I'm just going to undo that for a second. You can vary what you do here. You can change your hardness, for example. I can change my brush size. Hardness here is 100%. I like to keep it up high. I just prefer that it gives that look, more natural look. For aligned, you can also go down to, we're going to say image. We can also go down to, that's source. And for line, I'm going to say none for now. And we're going to zoom back in with control and my mouse wheel. And I'm going to click. And I'm going to patch. But you see the hardness, you see the difference. If I get in close, you can actually see the circle. So depending on what you're doing, you're going to have to be careful about hardness. And basically decide that, what kind of brush tip you'd like to use. This is grass. So, even something like this, we can take sample from, and as you can see, when it fills in, it's a little more natural. So it's up to you. how you play around with it, but you should get to know the tool a little bit. And when you come out, that's just showing me my brush tip. Don't be alarmed. When we come out, we can definitely see the result. Just going to patch in here. As you can see, and I can change opacity there if I want it to be higher to basically transplant. The only problem with higher is you start to see some of the tone of the brush. Okay, and if you're lower, that kind of gets lost. So it's about subtleties using these things. In many cases, your rounded brush also starts to appear. So again, it's about zooming in. It's about lowering your brush size, taking samples as you go, and putting those samples in place. Okay. In this case, my opacity is a little hot, a little low. I'll raise it up a little bit more. And about filling it in to get a more realistic look as you go. So the objective in this case is to obviously fill in many of these roads. If I was to come down to my alignment and say aligned, make my brush a little bigger. There are faster ways to do this. Change my brush to feather. There are definitely faster ways to do it, but faster is usually visible, so not recommended. As you can see, going all the way across pretty quickly. But as I get closer, I can kind of see maybe a little bit of that. So take another sample, and again, bringing it across when I come out. We want to make sure that that blends nicely, that has the contrast of the grass. Some ways to achieve that is to lower your opacity down even more. Click on the grass and give it a sort of a soft glow as you go, and fill that in. And when you come back out, you've got a little bit more of a contrast. You want it to still look like grass, just without a road. And that is the Clone Stamp tool in a nutshell, with some of the options available to it. Clone Stamp Perspective, same options, but allows you to basically to draw a perspective of your sample and then manipulate the sample that way. So probably touch on this tool, or sort of going to modify. So here we go. Take this down. We can make our perspective skewed. And where I select outside will appear inside as I go. So it modifies the page. It'll skew if it was something more like an object that was easier to see. It would be skewed inside this as per my settings, using these setting tabs here to pull in and out. So whatever my perspective I want to skew. Sometimes this is good for things like digital art, advertising, digital media, and different Photoshop projects where you want to skew someone's face or eyeball or perspective, etc., etc. So you can change this however you wish, and your clone will take on that perspective inside there. So that is the Clone Perspective tool in a nutshell too. For the Healing Brush tool, we're going to choose a different aspect here. We're going to choose a portrait of someone with a few blemishes on their face. We're going to come down here. I'm still going to be on alignment none. I'm going to keep my opacity, but I'm going to keep my opacity high, but I'm going to keep my brush feathered. Lower my brush size. And for the purpose of this, we want to get right down low. Use a small brush and control mouse wheel in. Hold control down and click. Get a sample and just come over top of the blemish and it disappears. Hold control down and click. That's left click, I should say. And bring it over top. Now be careful in this tool. It's an excellent tool, but the more you click, you're creating new blurry blemishes yourself. So that's why I like to use a lower opacity when I do stuff like this, and just try to maybe hide it a little bit more, but sampling close to your target is essential. If I was to take a shady area like this and come over here, I'm putting the shady area in the lighter part of the face, and that's what we don't want to do. So right beside it if you can. And moving yourself across, just cleaning up a little bit. And you can download different brush tips and change them to do something like this to give it a more natural feel. You can use different contrast brush tips that sort of pepper the clone aspect right into the image. But when you start to move out, you've got to go zoom in and out a lot to get an idea. She's a bit bumpy, so we're probably going to smooth that out later. Other features will allow you to do stuff like that, but for now, we're looking at cleaning up the blemish. And we'll try a hard opacity just to give you an example. With feather, let's take this, copy here. So sometimes, you have to switch between the two, depending what area of the face you're doing, what kind of touch-up you're doing. But you can generally come right through and clean up all the blemishes that exist. Oops, that was not sampled. Here. Not properly sampled. So be careful how you click, careful where you click. Really, that's the idea. We can get rid of wrinkles in many ways using these two tools. Go along the wrinkle lines, make them lighter, make them less deep looking. There's a lot of different ways to use these two tools. Oops, picking up too much here. You get the idea. So how you sample matters, brush size matters. Bring it out, and we'll go back to before. You can see before and after. Okay, and that is the healing brush tool. And again, play with the options. You'll find them very useful. And the clone stamp and the healing brush and the clone perspective tool are all share similar options. So you have to know it for one to know it all. And play around with those two. So clone stamp on the grassy field, get rid of those roads, and try the healing brush to get rid of some blemishes.